So we've watched 2 weeks of football and some players are greatly exceeding our expectations. If the season started today, we would have been drafting them way higher in our fantasy drafts, and they're literally skyrocketing up my rankings right now. And it's not just for this week, but for the rest of the season as well. Here are those 10 players that you need to know about. And we'll start with Jerome Ford, who is one of the biggest and hottest topics right now because of the Nick Chubb injury, and there's a lot to unpack here with Kareem Hunt signing in Cleveland. We'll discuss all of this. Look, the Browns drafted Ford in 2022 despite having 3 running backs under contract, which shows just how much they like him. And yes, indeed, Kareem Hunt signed on Wednesday with the Browns. He went back there, but I'm viewing this as just him going to be a backup. They had the whole summer to bring in Kareem Hunt, and they said, no, we want Jerome Ford instead. Basically, the way I look at this is they could have chose Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, or Darrell Henderson, basically an inefficient veteran. You might as well choose the one who knows the system in Hunt, because the Browns know better than anybody else that Kareem Hunt wasn't great last year. 49th in yards per touch, a career worst. A career worst on the ground, 60th amongst all running backs in true yards per carry, 3.7 yards per touch. So I'm viewing Jerome Ford as a top 20 running back the rest of the season. No, I don't think he's going to be top 5 like Nick Chubb was, but I think he'll be the lead back. And he has a lot of great features. He has solid size around 215 pounds, and elite speed, as you can see right here on Player Profiler. His speed score was 84th percentile, borderline top 15% of all time. So he has the athleticism and the size, and he also has the college production. His final year at Cincinnati, when they were that playoff team with Desmond Ridder, he puts up 1,300 rushing yards, and then with his receiving yards of 220, over 1,500 total yards and 20 touchdowns. And Jerome Ford just a month ago was trending to be one of these Jaylen Warren hype pieces for your NFL draft season, like the popular backup running back. But in early August, this guy ends up injuring his hamstring, and there's questions then that start to come up. Will he even be ready week 1? Well, he actually was ready week 1 and saw a nice role. Now, according to Fantasy Life's data, in week 1, he saw 42% of the snaps and handled 41% of the carries. He had 15 carries week 1, but a lot of that was in a blowout when they were beating their division rival, the Bengals, by 20 points late. But then in week 2, after Nick Chubb got injured, we continued to see Jerome Ford be the clear RB2 for the Browns. Because after Chubb left the game, Ford handled 90% of the running back carries and totaled 20 opportunities. So I know Kareem Hunt is now there. He's worth adding in like 12-team or deeper leagues, but Jerome Ford is the guy moving forward. Now, if we're talking about players skyrocketing up the rankings and having some of the best metrics through 2 weeks, look no further than the Texans wide receiver 1, Nico Collins, who is now an every week starter for you in fantasy. Because through 2 weeks, he's ran 72% of the routes and earned a 23% target share for this team. That's translated to a team high 20 targets. And he is third right now in the NFL with 287 air yards. That means he's being targeted downfield, which is one half of the cheat code recipe for wide receivers, downfield targets. Now, this is impressive because the Texans were down 4 offensive linemen in week 2, and CJ Stroud still found success. Stroud ended up throwing for nearly 400 yards. He threw 47 times. He looked very composed for a rookie quarterback. He wasn't scrambling. He was moving up in the pocket. These are all great signs for future development of Stroud and the upside of Nico Collins for the rest of the season. Now, it is true that in week 2, it was actually Tank Dell and Robert Woods running more routes than Nico. You could see right here, the rookie Tank Dell ends up seeing 45 total routes. He earns 10 targets. Those were both more than Nico Collins by only 1 target. But here's the thing. His targets were not as valuable as Collins, because the average target for Collins was about 14 yards downfield, and for Tank Dell, it was like 8 or 9 yards downfield. So there's just more upside on those targets for Nico. And this is a pretty cool chart by Ryan Heath on Twitter. Basically, if you want to look into this, the first read, the number 1 option when a quarterback is looking to pass so far this season, Nico Collins ranks right here. The higher up you are, the better. He's in line with guys like Devonta Smith and even Calvin Ridley and CeeDee Lamb, if you can see right here. That's how good he's been through 2 weeks. So if CJ Stroud is actually going to be pretty good and the offensive line should only get healthier as the season goes on, this is a good recipe for Nico. Because every week the Texans are going to have to throw. They're almost 10-point underdogs yet again this week, so probably another 35 to 40 plus attempts for CJ Stroud and 7 to 10 targets for Collins. So Nico Collins is the wide receiver who's rising the most up the rankings. Now let's go to the running back who fits this same criteria. And that'll be the Rams running back Kyon Williams, who right now, this second-year player out of Notre Dame, he was thought by many last year when he was coming into the league to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, but he fell to being a 5th round pick because of his NFL combine metrics, his athleticism. According to Player Profiler, look at this. The lower these bars are, the worse. They're supposed to be close to 100% to be an elite athlete. These are all low, and it's mainly his speed and his burst. But coming out of college, Kyon Williams was known for 2 major skills: his pass protection and his pass catching. He averaged over 3 receptions per game in his 2 years as a starter in college, and this is already translated to the NFL. Because through just 2 weeks, and in week 1, he was splitting the backfield with Cam Akers, he's already earned 12 targets, 6 per game at the running back position. And not a lot of people know this, but this offseason reports came out that Kyon Williams was actually expected to be the starter last year, but then he fractured his foot in the preseason. But now he's easily a top 20 running back for the rest of the season, and as of right now through 2 weeks, well, he's number 2 in fantasy points, only behind Christian McCaffrey. And in week 2, without Cam Akers, as Cam Akers was a healthy scratch, now they're trying to trade him, the Rams, he saw an elite 97% of the snaps, Kyon Williams handled 80% of the routes and 78% of the rush attempts. This is as good as a role gets. And he ends up putting up a top 5 fantasy finish, 28 fantasy points. Look at this, 20 touches, 100 total yards, 2 touchdowns. All that is great. Probably not going to sustain the touchdown luck, but 10 targets is elite, and that should somewhat continue, 5 or 6 targets a game. So he's a starter every week in this surprise Rams offense that currently ranks 5th through 2 games. Now, if you're enjoying this content, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We are oh so close to pushing towards 100,000, and also it'll allow you to see all my future content. The next man up is the rookie Jordan Addison, who's rising quickly because look, he's producing, scoring touchdowns, and slowly seeing more playing time. You see, his career started in week 1 with him running just 66% of the routes. He was the wide receiver 3, only a slot option as KJ Osborne is still starting ahead of him, but these 66% of the routes since the Vikings throw so much were actually 31 total routes run. Addison ended up leading the Vikings in week 1 with an average target distance of 14 yards. So he's being targeted downfield on average or in the intermediate parts. That's good. And then in week 2, you can see his overall routes increase from 31 to 36. He runs 12% more routes. He sees 5 targets again, another deep target, and yet again leads the team in downfield usage. And here's the deal. The Vikings have thrown the most both in neutral situations when the game's close and overall, no matter if they're winning or trailing by a lot. And even if Osborne just keeps this role as the wide receiver 3, he's going to keep running 30 plus routes because of this tweet right here. Nobody else other than the 3 starters, Jefferson, Osborne, and Addison, has ran a route at the wide receiver position for the Vikings. Addison ranks top 30 in routes run this year for wide receivers, even though he's the wide receiver 3 on his team. That's how much this team is throwing. Imagine when he takes the wide receiver 2 job from KJ Osborne. And just a reminder, he's a first-round pick who in 2021 was named the best wide receiver in college football when Kenny Pickett was his quarterback, putting up 1,600 yards. All right, now let's move from one rookie to the next with this next QB. And it is by far the best fantasy quarterback amongst the rookies. It's Anthony Richardson, who's already had proven in just about 5 quarters of play because he's left both games with injuries that he is a legit top 10 fantasy quarterback. And he might even push towards the top 5. Now let's break down his game through these first 2 weeks. In week 1, he has a good showing. He was a top 5 quarterback, putting up 22 fantasy points. The big thing right here, he threw 37 times. The Colts offense in week 1 threw at the 7th highest rate under new head coach Shane Steichen. This was somewhat of a surprise. And then you get the 10 fantasy points on the ground with a touchdown and 40 yards. That's kind of his MO, but it was nice to see the combination of both of these skills as a passer and a runner. And then in week 2, he doesn't even play a half of football. He basically plays like 3 drives in this game, and he goes out there and he finishes still as a top 12 quarterback because of the 2 rushing touchdowns. He doesn't have enough time to actually get some passes off in the game. But the interesting part was when he left the game, Gardner Minshew comes in and completes 19 of 23 passes, which is a testament to the easiness of the offense for quarterbacks under Shane Steichen, the new coach from the Eagles in previous years. He did the same thing with Jalen Hurts when he was there. And if Gardner Minshew looked good in this offense, yeah, Anthony Richardson definitely will as the season goes on. Look at this. The number 1 overall ranked athlete in combine history at the quarterback position. He's literally built like LeBron James. So expect Richardson to easily finish as a top 10 quarterback this year with legit top 3 upside. The next player quickly skyrocketing up the rankings is Rashad White, the Bucs running back, who is a top 15 running back for the rest of the season right now. And this is a trend we've been talking about a lot the past 1 to 2 weeks, that this offense under Baker Mayfield, guys like Mike Evans, it's looking really good with the new offensive coordinator Dave Canales from the Seahawks. And Canales loves Rashad White. His first impressions of him were last year against him when he was with the Seahawks, and Rashad White put up over 100 yards and was stiff-arming dudes. And in the offseason, we only got positive news about Rashad White being the workhorse. We got that week 1 when he played 79% of the snaps, saw 57% of the carries, but he was inefficient. He only turned his 19 touches into 49 total yards week 1, had less than 7 fantasy points, and this started making people question like, oh, is Sean Tucker, the undrafted rookie out of Syracuse who dealt with some medical issues in the pre-draft process, is he now going to steal White's job? In my opinion, this was too premature, and we talked about it last week on some of my spots on Yahoo and here. Because then in week 2, you still saw the same snaps usage. There was no Chase Edmonds in this game, so his routes for Rashad White went from 55% to 70%, and he finally popped off. In a good matchup against the Bears, White saw 22 touches, another elite role, over 100 yards and a touchdown. He finished as a top 10 running back. White has now played 76% of the snaps and averaged over 20 opportunities per game to start the season. And now in week 3 on Monday Night Football, where we get 2 Monday Night Football games again, which is an interesting and fun thing, well, he's going to have a tough matchup. The Eagles, they have a great defensive line. Their linebackers are completely turned over. They lost them in free agency, so this is maybe a nice spot when he gets to the second level and in the receiving game, but up the middle, it's going to be tough versus these defensive linemen. That said, if he has a good game, great, and if he doesn't, it opens up a buy low opportunity if you don't own Rashad White. Now, the next man up is the trusty veteran who just continues to produce despite turning 31 in like a month. Now, in week 1, the Seahawks offense looked atrocious. They struggled immensely. Tyler Lockett only had 4 targets before leaving with injury. But in week 2, the offense and Geno Smith turned it back to their 2022 ways, and Lockett ran 89% of the routes and ended up leading the team with a 29% target target share. Now that 29% of the targets ended up being 10 targets, and he had 26 points because Lockett found the end zone twice. So through 2 weeks, Lockett leads the Seahawks wide receivers with 14 targets, 163 air yards, and 5 end zone targets. And by the way, those end zone targets are when he's standing in the end zone. So a high chance of touchdowns, that leads the NFL, those 5. So Lockett is yet again on pace to have another top 24 finish, which he's had now in 5 straight seasons. Mr. Consistent. And just a fun thing I like to track is Tyler Lockett with Geno Smith versus with Russell Wilson. Now in 23 career games with Geno, he's averaging 14.2 points. This just continues to rise. With Russell Wilson, it was 12.5. Now, once again, entering week 3, Lockett's going to have a good matchup against the Panthers. Their secondary is banged up. It's kind of a questionable situation on who's going to be the number 2 cornerback here. And the Seahawks are 6-point home favorites with a 24-point team total, expecting another nice game from Tyler Lockett. Now, before we get onto this next young and explosive wide receiver who's climbing up the rankings, I got to tell you about something. And it is the Fantasy Blueprint, where every day of the week, I'll be sending you a tool to help you win your matchup for that week and overall make the fantasy playoffs and take home a championship. So you can see Monday, the waiver wire tools, Tuesday, key stats database, and it goes on and down. Rankings are on here, game by game matchup notes, rest of season rankings. These all will come your way daily. This is a part of the Fantasy Blueprint that thousands of people already have access to. And if you want to get access, it's simple. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And here's the thing. It's just $5 for the entire year if you go through this route right here. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund that $5 right back to you. No questions asked. You didn't make it. I don't care if it was an injury or whatever it might have been. You get it back. So this is risk-free. You might as well use the tools that are going to help you and the thousands of others get there. So to get access today, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And as promised, let's get to that exciting wide receiver, and it's Zack Flowers, who rose up the rankings in this video a lot last week because of his exciting week 1. He didn't have as good of a week 2, but he's still rising. And now, as a reminder, in week 1, he played 93% of the routes, operated as a starter over Rashad Bateman, and look at this, earned 50% of Lamar Jackson's targets, the second wide receiver ever in their debut in the NFL to earn a 50% target share. Now, of course, he was going to take a step back for the rest of the season. You can't keep that type of target share up, and Mark Andrews was returning. But he still was good for a rookie, reminder, in week 2. 87% of the routes continued to operate as a starter over Rashad Bateman and earned 15% of the targets. Obviously a massive drop down, but still okay for what is a quote-unquote down game. Because in this down game, he still puts up 11 fantasy points, has 62 yards. When you add in his 6-yard carry, 68 total yards is like pacing for nearly 1,200 on the season in a quote-unquote, again, down game. Yeah, I'll take this. So now through 2 games, you have this rookie leading the wide receivers for the Ravens with 15, more than double any other receiver. Odell with just 7. Yes, he left a game early. I get that, but still elite usage so far for Zack Flowers. So we've talked about a quarterback, a couple of receivers and running backs. We haven't hit on the tight ends just yet. And the tight end I want to talk about who's rising up the ranks is the guy who leads all tight ends in fantasy points. So it might seem obvious, but you might not know that stat. And yes, it's Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots through 2 weeks. He was a sneaky draft pick this offseason, but some people got scared when Mike Gesicki signed there. But once Gesicki was hurt in camp, he became a good pick once again. Henry currently ranks 3rd amongst all tight ends in targets through 3 games. Only TJ Hawkinson and Zach Ertz currently have more. And maybe the most impressive stat, Henry has an NFL high 133 air yards among tight ends. Now this is interesting because it's been quite a long time, like when he played with Phillip Rivers in the Chargers, that he was known as a downfield threat. And where he is winning downfield is really interesting and actually sustainable. It's in the slot. You can see right here, he leads the NFL with Mike Gesicki amongst tight ends with 9 slot targets. 9 of his 13 are from the slot, and that's where you'll get a big mismatch on a linebacker for a guy like Hunter Henry. So as long as this offense just looks decent, it looked good week 1, it looked decent week 2, well, I think Hunter Henry is going to be a starter for you. And speaking of guys you can start, especially this week, let's talk about Josh Reynolds. Now we talked about him in the waiver wire video, but more information has come out since then. And this is huge information that's going under the radar as I record this, but I'll probably pick up throughout the week. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he had to put like a plate in his shoe during the game on Sunday. That didn't really get picked up by the media. We talked about it on the Monday waiver wire video. He's now missing practices. What people are saying is a turf injury, potential turf toe. If this is turf toe, this guy's going to miss weeks, which means Josh Reynolds will be the wide receiver 1 of this team with not a lot of competition. It would be like Denzel Mims, Khalif Raymond, and Marvin Jones as his main wide receiver competition. And Reynolds is already seeing legit starter usage. He ranks 11th in wide receiver usage so far this season. Last week, he ran 30 routes, 6 targets, and on this usage, he put up 24 fantasy points. And if Amon-Ra misses some time, those targets and routes are only going to increase. He'll operate as the wide receiver 1. If he's on your waivers, definitely add him because you can start him this week. And here's a bonus player for you. Now, the 11th player in this video, because we got to talk about James Cook as somebody who's rising up the ranks. He is the 14th overall running back in fantasy points right now, despite not scoring a touchdown. And through 2 games, he's been the Bills' RB1. He's seen 60% of the snaps, handled 58% of the carries, and by far the majority of the passing down usage. In week 1, he had a tough matchup, but in week 2, he finally popped off his breakout game as an NFL player in year 2 with over 150 total yards on 21 touches. He averaged over 7.5 yards per touch. Now, this is the efficient James Cook we know. He ranked 3rd in yards per touch, only behind Swift and Breece Hall last year. Now, the knock on Cook is that he's smaller and he's not going to earn the red zone work, and we've already discussed that that doesn't even matter if he doesn't. But here's the thing. He's actually earning snaps inside the 10-yard line, and look at this. He's actually seen 2 red zone carries inside the 10. Yeah, Damian Harris and Latavius Murray have 4 each, and Josh Allen has 3. This is not going to be James Cook game, but it's at least nice to see that he's seeing this type of usage. A couple will lead to more touchdowns. And by the way, Cook's not going to end the year with 0 touchdowns. He's going to threaten the top 10 running backs this year, and the reason he's in this video, he continues to rise into my top 12. So these are the players who are skyrocketing up my rankings after week 3. Now, if you want to see some of the players you need to trade away, maybe for some of these guys, well, check out this video right here. Thank you, beautiful people, for tuning in. If you made it this far into the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can see my content that's coming out for the rest of this week and the rest of the year.